Hey, what's up, guys? This is North Sea Video. This is take number 3. Long story short, next Ricochet video is in the works, but today I'm going to be sort of responding to, but mostly just talking about something. Well, I'm going to be doing a video. It's going to be partly a response to Insane Asylum Cherry Paul's recent Raw Car vlog about the recent police shooting in Minneapolis of one Duante Wright, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I hope I am. Now, I wanted to talk and clarify a couple things about it, things that I've heard about it, things that I've read about it from my perspective. So it's going to be sort of a response / explanation to Insane Asylum Cherry Paul's video, but mostly it's just going to be my own thing. Now, Paul in his video talked about guns and tasers, and now they have different safety mechanisms. Now, before we get into any of that, I want to clarify one thing. As I've mentioned before, I am very politically different from Paul. I wouldn't say just straight up right-wing, or I'm definitely not what you'd call far-right, at least in my personal opinion and personal assessment of myself. But I think I'm a little more right than center-right, okay? Like, take center right and then just shift a little bit more to the right, and that's where I consider myself. Straight, white, Christian, conservative, slightly right of center right, young man. And I just want to say that the shooting of Duante Wright in Minneapolis yesterday or the day before was absolutely a bad shoot, and the officer responsible for it should serve prison time. There you go. Let me be the first to say it. Right? Right of center right, conservative male, that was a bad shoot. The officer involved should serve prison time, period. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, now I'd like to talk about some of the nuance behind it. I am extremely pro-Second Amendment. I am zealously pro-Second Amendment. I am the kind of all gun laws are infringements kind of pro-2A, okay? I am the every race, every gender, every sexual orientation, every ethnicity, every nationality, every blank American should be allowed to possess whatever kind of weapons they see fit that they can operate responsibly and use to protect themselves from bad actors who would seek to harm them, kind of pro-Second Amendment, okay? There are two things that come from that. Number one, Duante Wright should have never been criminalized in the first place. As Paul mentioned in his video, he said he may have had warrants. Turns out Duante Wright did in fact have warrants. That's why he was pulled over in the first place. In my personal opinion, he never should have had those warrants in the first place, because the warrants were for misdemeanor firearm charges like firearm possession charges, which, in my personal opinion, as a zealously, staunchly, shall not be infringed kind of pro-Second Amendment guy, there should be no such thing as a weapon possession charge, okay? Like, when you talk about the kind of people who shouldn't have weapons, my list of people who shouldn't have weapons is people in jail or prison and people in actual literal insane asylums, like they're so crazy they cannot be trusted to participate in society to any degree. That's the kind of people I think should not be allowed to have weapons, because if you're in an insane asylum or a prison, you shouldn't have weapons while you're there. But that's really more of a location-based thing. If somebody is convicted of a felony, I don't care what felony it is, and the laws that are set up by society, the rules, the procedures set up by society say, this person committed X felony, okay? Whether it be the M word, the R word, stealing, grand theft, whatever. If somebody commits a felony and they own weapons, and like, let's say a family member takes in the weapons for them while they're in prison, 20 years go by. 20 years of being in a locked cell with no window, with 1 hour of sunlight a day. They go through that every day for 20 years. They talk to a pastor or an imam or a rabbi or just not psychic, but a psyche counselor, like a how am I blanking on this? A therapist, a psychiatrist, whatever, while they're in there. 20 years go by. They change as a person. They have served their debt to society. They get out of prison. That family member's been holding their guns for them. Here's your guns back. Here's your pistol. Here's your permit to carry, if that's a thing in your state. Here's your AR-15. Here's your AK-47. Here's your Uzi. Whatever that person owned going into 20 years of 1 hour of sunlight a day in prison to pay their debts to society, when they get out, if those guns are still like in the family or being held for them, hand them back. Their debt's paid. Their debt's paid. I had a credit card where I had like $340 outstanding balance on it. I got my stimulus check from the government, paid it off. That debt was paid. Capital One said, you no longer owe us anything. They pay their debt to society, hand them back, okay? That's the level of pro-Second Amendment I am. That being said, owning a firearm, which I have one literally on me right now, just off camera, in a holster, carrying it with a permit, legally. It is a responsibility that cannot be overstated. It is a responsibility that cannot be overstated and must never be underestimated. If you're going to own a firearm, you have been handed the power to end a life. A tool specifically made for causing life-ending injuries to living things. Now, it's an awesome power, and one that regular average Joes, average Janes, average Duantes should all be allowed to possess. Because this is the example I give. When you're at the ATM and the local crackhead comes at you with a knife for your wallet, you need to be able to cause life-threatening, life-ending injuries to him in an instant. Because you don't know if he's gonna stab you in the heart or the gut and just take your wallet and run off. You need to be able to have that power. But if you're going to, you need to respect it. You need to train with it. You need training. You need practice. And I am loath to accept the idea of laws that make training or classes of any kind a prerequisite for the owning of firearms. But when people talk about laws that, impact or in any way even approach infringing on firearms, that's the one kind that I can have a discussion about that. I can sit down with you and I can see where you're coming from. And at the end of the day, if we lived in a society that said, if you want to own firearms, you have to take a class, some kind of training, some kind of basic firearm operations class in order to possess a firearm, I wouldn't be perfectly happy with it, but I would sleep at night with it, okay? I like the idea of a society where everybody is responsible enough to do that on their own, and the people who aren't willing to do that just don't bother getting firearms. That's their choice. I'm not saying everybody should have a firearm. I'm saying everybody should be allowed to, with extremely narrow, strictly narrow exceptions. Like, again, people actively in prison for committing a crime. Now, where this comes in is that the facts of the matter are, A, Duante Wright should not have had any firearm possession charges in the first place, because that shouldn't be a thing that exists. Secondly, the officer who shot Duante Wright. Let's talk about that. Paul mentioned safety mechanisms. Now, Glocks, the officer was carrying a Glock. Now, Glock firearms are the most popular firearm in the world by units sold. Glocks are in terms of sales, they are the PlayStation 2 combined with Nintendo DS of firearms in terms of sales numbers. Something like 60% of the world's firearm sales, at least in terms of handguns, are Glock brand firearms. Glock brand firearms have no manual safety. So a manual safety is, and I'm gonna about to play fast and loose with YouTube rules here. But to show you an example, this is a Smith & Wesson model 3914. This lever up here, it's actually ambidextrous, that's pretty cool. This lever up here is a manual safety. It's also a decocker, actually. If I turn this lever down, well, first let me put the gun into battery, completely unloaded. Put it into battery. This lever up here is a manual safety. Now on this firearm and on Beretta-style firearms, it's also a decocker. Drops the hammer down. Now, while this safety is engaged, I can pull this trigger all day, the firearm will not fire. I'm not going to demonstrate that with it loaded for obvious reasons, but that's how it works. On some firearms, it actually prevents you from pulling the trigger at all. On this one, the trigger does nothing. So, that's an example of a manual safety. Now, Glock brand firearms don't have that. They have what's called a safe action, which is designed that if you were to drop the gun or if something were to snag on part of the trigger, it would be much less likely for the gun to go off, for it to fire. If you carry a gun with a manual safety like the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield that I used to carry, and you train with it, it's not any slower drawing it out, flicking the safety off, than just drawing something like a Glock that doesn't have it. However, the idea is that you train yourself so that when you draw the gun out, your finger is on the side of the firearm, not in the trigger guard. This is an example of the kind of training and practice you need to do with your firearm in order to have one safely and operate it safely. Now, Paul talked in his video about how she shouted taser, 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 and her excuse was that she thought she was going for her taser. He talked about the differences in weight and the differences in design and everything. The problem with that is that when you're in a situation where you believe that your life is in danger. Now, apparently, Duante, according to the officer, and this is just the officer's words against anybody else's, unfortunately, it can't be her word against his because he's not around to present his word, but her word is he looked like he was diving for a weapon. He very well could have been going to his glove box for his registration. If that were the case, that's the kind of thing where you tell the officer with your hands on the wheel, "Hey, I got to get my registration, it's in my glove box, okay?" You maintain eye contact with them, you slowly reach for the registration, whatever. I'm not trying to excuse the officer from responsibility, by the way. Let me make that clear. But when you're in a situation where you believe that your life is in danger, whether that belief is reasonable or not, a number of physiological and psychological things happen to you. Number one is that your body gets a dump of adrenaline that is just incomparable. So things like the weight difference between a loaded Glock and a taser are things that your brain is not even going to bother trying to differentiate, because when you're in that stress level of code red approaching code black, your body operates entirely off of instinct and muscle memory. And that's why training is so important, so that you can train your muscle memory to do the correct things in situations like this, which this officer absolutely failed to do. That really was this officer's ultimate failing to train her muscle memory to adequately respond to situations like this for her. Because when you're in a situation, again, where you believe, reasonably or otherwise, that your life is in danger, there is no thinking. There is no differentiation between the weight of a loaded Glock and a taser. There is no thinking. You don't think about what you're doing, you do it. Your body does it for you. It's like Deku from My Hero Academia. My body moved before I could think. That's how it works in those fight or flight situations. Now, does this excuse the officer for killing Duante Wright? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. In my personal opinion, now I'm not a lawyer yet, in my personal opinion, based on the facts that I have gathered so far, as I can assess the situation right now, it is my personal belief that this officer should be charged, and this officer should be charged and tried. I won't say what I think the jury should do, because that's up to them, but I believe this officer should be arrested, charged, and tried for negligent manslaughter, or whatever the Minnesota equivalent is, when recklessness or negligence with the intent to cause bodily harm to a person results in their death. Now, when it comes to the Derek Chauvin trial for the killing of George Floyd, a lot of facts have come out in that case that make it look like Derek Chauvin did not murder George Floyd. Namely, testimony by use of force experts that he could have employed a taser, but chose to use a lesser amount of force, which was a physical restraint. I'm not saying I think Chauvin's innocent. I'm not saying I think he's guilty. I'm saying as the facts come out, these are the things we look for. Derek Chauvin, according to the expert, could have used a taser. He would have been within boundaries to use a taser. He chose to use less force in the form of physical restraints. This officer was attempting to use a taser. Tasers are not non-lethal things. Even as the ACLU put it, tasers are not non-lethal. They can stop a heart, they can kill. They are considered less lethal. The terminologies actually move from non-lethal to less lethal, same with beanbag rounds and shotguns, as a less lethal alternative to just straight up shooting somebody with a gun. This officer intended to shock Duante Wright, sorry. Google search suggests Dwayne Wright, because I guess a lot of people are spelling it that way. This officer intended to cause a very large electric shock to Duante Wright to immobilize him. So she intended to cause some level of harm. She just didn't intend to kill him. So I think, in my opinion, honestly, murder is off the table. She did not intend to kill him, but she intended to cause some level of harm, and through negligence, through not training herself properly, through not taking the steps to train her muscle memory, so that her muscle memory can differentiate for her whether she's reaching for the Glock or the taser. Maybe the taser was on her belt, the Glock, she panics, her adrenaline's running, she's operating off muscle memory, she isn't thinking, her body's doing the thinking for her, her spinal cord's doing the thinking for the brain. She instead of reaching for the taser on the front of the belt or on the front of the uniform, she reaches for the Glock because she did a lot of training to reach for the Glock, didn't do enough training to reach for the taser. She should be tried. She should be charged and tried with no less than manslaughter. Because at the end of the day, when you own a firearm, you are responsible for what comes out of that barrel. If a projectile comes out of the barrel of your firearm, strikes a person, and kills them, that's your responsibility. Whether you intended to kill them or not. Whether you intended for the projectile to come out of the barrel or not. Even if you intend to just point your firearm at somebody, but your trigger finger is too itchy and you accidentally squeeze a little too hard and it pops off, like with a double action or something, you intend to just do a half squeeze to like cock the hammer back a little bit, but you go too far and you shoot, it's your responsibility. If you thought you were holding something completely different besides a real firearm, Whether it be a taser, model gun, airsoft, whatever. If you grab a real firearm and you didn't even know it was a real firearm and you didn't mean for it to be a real firearm, you squeeze that trigger and a bullet comes out the barrel, strikes somebody and kills them, that's your responsibility. I don't have all the facts. Just like at the very beginning, we didn't have hardly any of the facts about the death of George Floyd, and opinions and beliefs about that, and many people have changed about it over the course of time. I don't have all the facts right now. But there are 3 things I do know. Number 1, Duante Wright should not have had any charges for possession of a firearm. That shouldn't be a thing. Number 2, the officer in question drew a firearm, squeezed the trigger, a bullet came out, struck Duante Wright, and it killed him. If that officer did not intend to shoot Duante Wright, that means she killed him unnecessarily and it was not okay. She shouted, "Taser, taser, taser." She thought she was holding a taser. She shot a bullet at him and killed him. That's her responsibility. Negligence, a failing to train her muscle memory to do the thinking for her properly, led to the death of a man who should not have even been criminalized, okay? This is not a George Floyd situation where, you can say he was already a criminal with a record, so they were on high alert. He was on drugs at the time. Maybe it was the drugs that killed him. Maybe the officer isn't even the cause of death. Maybe he was a resisting arrest. Whatever the case may be, Duante Wright should have never had a run-in with officers. He didn't try to counterfeit money even at all. He didn't even really commit anything that at the time that the officers got there, he wasn't committing any kind of crimes actively. He didn't have any warrants that he should have had ever, because the warrants again were for possession of firearm charges, which possession of a firearm should never be a charge. But let's throw that aside. Let's throw my opinions on the Second Amendment aside. Duante Wright was pulled over by police. A police officer grabbed what she thought was a taser and shot him. That was her failing. She killed a person that she should not have killed. There are many times throughout life, year over year, when both police officers and regular citizens like myself, not that I've experienced this personally, but regular citizens like myself, do shoot and kill someone with a firearm, and it was completely justified, completely legal, and it was the right thing to do to protect themselves. This was not that situation. This was an officer who, at best, failed to respect the firearm that she was carrying, and her failings led to the death of an innocent person, period. End of story. Based on the facts, let's say hypothetically it were up to me. Let's say I was the jury. Let's say the jury was just me. And they presented the facts, both sides presented the facts that I have currently in the case. I am all 12 members of the jury. I am the single person on the jury. The right to a trial by jury of peers was waived, but they requested one single juror, and it was me. Somehow, just hypothetical situation, I am the entire jury. And both sides present their facts, and all the facts presented amount to the facts that I currently have right now in the real world. I would hand down a guilty verdict of manslaughter, which would result in this officer receiving prison time. Again, straight, white, Christian, conservative male, right of center right. This was a bad shoot, and in my opinion, this officer should be charged, tried, and upon conviction, imprisoned for no less than negligent manslaughter. The ending of a life through negligent action. Intended to cause harm, but not necessarily intending to cause death. This was a bad shoot. This was not a Rayshard Brooks incident. This was not a, I don't know, this was not this was not an incident where people are blowing it up over nothing, or the officer was at least reasonable in their actions, if not right. This isn't a situation where somebody pointed a taser at an officer and fired it, and then the officer responded by firing their weapon, killing the person. No, this was an officer who, through gross, extreme, unjustifiable amounts of negligence and personal failing, ended the life of a completely innocent, at the time, person. That is my personal belief at the time of this recording, April 13th, 2021, approximately sometime in the early afternoon, 2-something p.m. My beliefs and opinions about this may change entirely as new information comes out. You know, maybe 6 months from now we'll get another camera angle that showed Duante Wright pulling his gun below the view of the door window and pointing it at the officer, and she's trying to tase him in response because she doesn't even want to shoot him even though he's got a gun pointed at her. I don't know. Hypothetically, anything could happen, but as of right now, as of the recording of this video, my belief is this was a bad shoot on a guy who should never have been criminalized at all, should not have even been interacting with the police at all, or I should say the police should not have been interacting with him at all. The officer, through nothing less than gross, unjustifiable negligence, ended the life of a person and should face the full consequences of that. With all that having been said, this is North Sea Hero, signing out.